Right now, as you watch this, the ground beneath one of the most beautiful landscapes in the American West is moving in ways that defy historical precedent. What scientists saw in last week's data changes everything we thought we knew about the stability of the Eastern Sierra. This is not a slow geological crawl. It is happening in real time, and the clock is ticking for the tens of thousands of people living within the shadows of the Sierra Nevada. In April 2026, the United States Geological Survey's California Volcano Observatory released a report that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. By using advanced artificial intelligence to reprocess 3 years of seismic data, researchers have expanded the earthquake catalog at the Long Valley Caldera from a previously documented 12,000 events to more than 54,000. That is a 450% increase in detected seismic activity. We aren't just seeing more earthquakes, we are seeing a system that is fundamentally fracturing. Beneath the Mona County region of California, the earth is screaming. For 18 consecutive years, the ground above the resurgent dome has been rising, reaching a staggering cumulative uplift of 1.4 meters. That is 4 feet and 7 inches of vertical displacement without a single day of subsidence. This isn't just a bulge, it is a structural transformation of the crust. This week, the USGS recorded a new all-time high in carbon dioxide emissions at the Horseshoe Lake Tree-Kill area and the Casa Diablo geothermal field. The data is so concerning that the scientist in charge at the California Volcano Observatory has publicly stated that raising the volcanic alert level to watch, the orange level, is a decision currently sitting on the table. We are talking about the Long Valley Caldera, a 20-mile-wide volcanic depression formed by a cataclysmic eruption 760,000 years ago. It is not a single mountain peak. It is a massive, hollowed-out subterranean engine located directly beneath critical infrastructure, highways, and the town of Mammoth Lakes. Since 2005, the system has entered a documented and escalating period of unrest. And as we analyzed the most recent data for this report, what we found was more significant than expected, because the experts are no longer using the cautious, hedged language of the past. In July 2025, during a formal briefing to the House Subcommittee on Energy and Mineral Resources, the director of the USGS stood before lawmakers and called the Long Valley situation a matter of national security and a pending hydrogeological emergency. This was not a press release, it was a formal declaration to the United States government. He disclosed that in the southern margin of the caldera, near the Crowley Lake region, scientific models now indicate a 40 to 50% probability that a new eruptive vent could open, a vent capable of generating pyroclastic density currents. 40 to 50%. This is the new reality for the American West. The mechanical failure of the California crust is no longer a theoretical projection. It is a measurable, daily reality, documented by the most dense sensor network in the United States. At 7:22 a.m. on February 14, 2026, seismographs located a 12-kilometer depth focus near the town of Crowley Lake, marking a shift in the caldera's plumbing system that scientists have been dreading. This deep-seated movement was not an isolated tremor, but part of a rhythmic, harmonic sequence, suggesting the physical displacement of high-pressure fluids or silicate melt. GNSS stations across the Long Valley region, specifically those monitored by the USGS California Volcano Observatory, showed a sudden 12-centimeter horizontal offset within a 48-hour window. To put that in perspective, that is more movement in 2 days than this region typically sees in a decade. The ground isn't just rising, it is being shoved aside. The technical details contained in the April 2026 weekly bulletins confirm that the dominant process is a brutal tug-of-war between the rising pressure of the magmatic system and the structural limits of the overlying rock. This is a coupled system where the extension of the Basin and Range province is meeting the localized inflation of a resurgent dome. In 2024 and 2025, the region was rocked by the largest seismic events in its instrumental history, magnitudes of 4.4 and 4.6. These weren't just shakes. They were structural failures of the crustal lid. What the new AI-driven catalog reveals is a terrifying density of fracturing. While 54,000 events sounds like a statistic, for the engineers monitoring the critical infrastructure of Mono County, it represents 54,000 tiny rips in the fabric of the Earth. We are seeing a specific scientific story written in the rock. Episodic injections of magma into shallow reservoirs, a process that the Earth and Planetary Science Letters confirms likely accelerated around 2019. The USGS has identified a layer of damaged rock sitting between 1.5 and 1.8 miles underground. This zone has been baked and brittle fractured by millennia of heat until it has lost its integrity. Think of it like a load-bearing wall in a house that has been subjected to dry rot and high-pressure steam for decades. It is holding up the entire weight of the Sierra Nevada, but it is riddled with holes. When fluid pressure from the deep magmatic source exceeds the strength of this weakened rock, the results are the earthquakes we are seeing now. The tension reached a new peak this week. On April 7, 2026, at 4:32 a.m. local time, a magnitude 3.3 earthquake at a depth of only 1.5 miles jolted residents in Mammoth Lakes out of their beds. But it was the event 36 hours later that truly alarmed the experts. At 4:48 p.m. on April 8th, a magnitude 3.4 earthquake struck at a depth of just 0.6 miles, barely a kilometer beneath the surface, with its epicenter directly under the Horseshoe Lake fumarole field. This is the shallowest part of the weakened layer. The shaking wasn't just felt, it was heard as a subterranean boom that echoed across the minaret vista. The depth is the message, one USGS geophysicist noted in a leaked internal memo. At 1 kilometer, you aren't just shifting plates. You are looking at the roof of the hydrothermal system failing. The infrastructure vulnerability here cannot be overstated. Highway 395, the primary artery for the Eastern Sierra and the critical logistics corridor for the entire state, runs directly across the caldera's floor. A major rupture or a sudden ground deformation event could sever this lifeline in seconds, isolating thousands. Furthermore, the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which provides a massive portion of the water supply for the millions of residents in Southern California, is at risk. If the ground continues to rise at the current rate of 3 centimeters per month, the gravity-fed systems of these aqueducts face catastrophic hydraulic failure. The rock is fracturing, the gases are hitting record concentrations, and the very ground that supports our roads and water lines is morphing into a landscape we no longer recognize. The instruments are tracing a communication pathway between the deep magma and the surface. For the first time, we aren't just guessing where the energy is going. We are watching it travel up the pipes. To understand the gravity of the 2026 data, we must look back at the geological scars that define the American West. The Long Valley Caldera is not just a dormant relic. It is a titan that once reshaped the North American continent. 760,000 years ago, this system produced the Bishop Tuff eruption, a cataclysm that ejected 150 cubic miles of burning ash and rock into the atmosphere. To put that in perspective, that is 600 times the volume of the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. The ash from that single Long Valley event reached as far east as Nebraska and Kansas, choking the center of the continent in a thick gray shroud. When we talk about cyclicity in the Eastern Sierra, we are talking about a system that has been recharging its batteries for nearly 1 million years. The historical parallels of the modern unrest began in 1980, when a series of 4 magnitude 6.0 earthquakes struck the Mammoth Lakes area within a single 48-hour period. Back then, the United States Geological Survey lacked the AI reprocessing capabilities we have today. They saw the shaking, they saw the 10 inches of uplift, and they issued a formal notice of potential volcanic hazard. But today's numbers make the 1980 unrest look like a tremor in a teapot. In 1980, scientists were looking at hundreds of earthquakes. In 2026, we are looking at 54,000. The scale of the new catalog suggests that the internal plumbing is significantly more fractured and pressurized than it was 40 years ago. This is where the concept of coupled systems becomes vital to our analysis. The Long Valley Caldera sits at a violent intersection where the tectonic extension of the Basin and Range Province, which is literally pulling the western United States apart, meets the volcanic upward pressure of the magma reservoir. This is not just a volcano, it is a structural leak in the North American plate. According to a 2025 study published in the journal Science, this coupling is what makes the 2026 activity so dangerous. The tectonic pulling of the Walker Lane belt is thinning the crust precisely where the magma is pushing up. Forecast models developed by the University of Nevada, Reno, and the USGS now incorporate these tectonic variables, and the results are sobering. If a breach occurs, the magma mush reservoir, once thought to be mostly solid, has been shown in 2024 seismic tomography to contain significant pockets of high-melt, mobile liquid magma. The volume of this liquid melt is estimated at roughly 1,000 cubic kilometers. If even 5% of that were to reach the surface, it would represent a regional catastrophe. Current USGS ash dispersal models for a moderate eruption scenario show a catastrophic plume trajectory. Depending on the prevailing winds of the jet stream, a 10-centimeter ash layer could bury the city of Reno within 12 hours, while a thinner yet flight-grounding layer would reach San Francisco, Las Vegas, and even Los Angeles. The scientific community has shifted its focus to the resurgent dome, the 10-mile-wide bulge in the center of the caldera. For decades, the consensus was that the system was cooling, but the 2026 detection of Very Long Period (VLP) seismic signals has shattered that assumption. These signals, typically associated with the movement of pressurized fluids through open conduits, were located at a depth of 3.6 kilometers. This is the smoking gun of the plumbing system. It suggests a direct link between the deep magma reservoir and the surface-level fumaroles at Mammoth Mountain. The statistics do not lie. Ground uplift of 1.4 meters in 18 years is not background noise. It is a structural deformation of the Earth's crust that is unprecedented in the instrumental history of the United States. We are witnessing the physical limits of rock being tested by the relentless expansion of a subterranean giant. As we look at the 40 to 50% probability of a new vent opening in the Crowley Lake area, we are forced to reckon with the reality that the geological clock in the Sierra Nevada is no longer ticking in centuries. It is ticking in months. Behind the dry technical data of the 54,000 event seismic catalog lies a harrowing human reality for the residents of Mono County and the engineers tasked with maintaining the lifelines of the American West. For Dr. Sarah Miller, a senior geophysicist at the USGS California Volcano Observatory's field office on Minaret Road, the clock is ticking atmosphere isn't a metaphor. It is the literal sound of the seismic alarms that now trigger dozens of times a day. Sitting in the shadow of Mammoth Mountain, she monitors the real-time feed of the VLP signals, the low-frequency pulses that suggest the magma is no longer just sitting deep in the crust, but is actively communicating with the surface. We are seeing structural degradation in real time, she noted in a recent internal briefing. When you reach 1.4 meters of vertical uplift, you aren't just moving dirt. You are bending the physical infrastructure of a modern American city until it snaps. The economic and psychological toll is already staggering. Elena Rodriguez, who who has owned a small lodge in Mammoth Lakes for 20 years, represents the 80,000 people living within the primary hazard zone. For her, the crisis is visible in the jagged cracks spiderwebbing across her foundation, and the sulfurous stench that now lingers in her basement, a direct result of the record-breaking CO2 and hydrogen sulfide emissions leaking from the fractured rock. Property values in the region have plummeted by an estimated $4.2 billion since the 2024 seismic swarm began, leaving many residents trapped in unsellable homes. This has created a secondary emergency. According to Marcus Thorn, the Mono County Emergency Management Coordinator, nearly 30% of local residents are actively refusing structural safety inspections. They fear that if a building inspector marks their home as unsafe due to earthquake damage, they will be forcibly displaced without the means to relocate. It is a managed uncertainty, Thorne says, where the fear of being homeless is currently outweighing the fear of the caldera. The infrastructure crisis extends far beyond the mountains. David Chen, a lead engineer for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, LADWP, is currently managing a nightmare scenario for the Los Angeles Aqueduct. This century-old engineering marvel, which supplies a critical portion of the water for 4 million people in Southern California, runs directly through the zone of maximum uplift. The 1.4 meters of vertical displacement has already warped the gravity-fed concrete channels, forcing emergency pumping operations that cost over $150,000 a day. A single magnitude 5.0 event, well within the current probabilistic models for 2026, could shatter the aqueduct's lining, severing the water supply to the nation's second-largest city. The cost of a total failure is estimated at upwards of $2.8 billion in immediate reconstruction and billions more in lost economic productivity for the Southland. Ecologically, the region is transforming into a graveyard. The Horseshoe Lake tree kill zone, long a localized curiosity, has expanded by 40% in the last 6 months alone. Large swaths of the Inyo National Forest are turning into ghost forests, as the surging carbon dioxide concentrations in the soil deprive roots of oxygen. Local wildlife, including deer and small mammals, have been found dead in topographic depressions where the invisible, odorless CO2 pools during still nights. It is a silent, creeping hazard that the 54,000 earthquakes have accelerated by creating new pathways for the gas to reach the surface. As the volcanic alert level hovers on the verge of orange, the logistics of a mass evacuation for the red zone are being stress-tested by FEMA and the California Office of Emergency Services, CalOES. Highway 395 is the only major north-south evacuation route. If a phreatic eruption, a steam-driven explosion, were to occur near the Devil's Postpile or Crowley Lake, the resulting ash and debris could render the highway impassable within minutes. Planners are now looking at the terrifying reality of trying to move 80,000 people, including tourists and seasonal workers, through narrow mountain passes that are themselves at risk of seismic landslides. The power grid, managed by Southern California Edison, is equally vulnerable. The high-voltage transmission lines that cross the caldera floor are being subjected to ground tensioning forces they were never designed to withstand. Telecommunications hubs on Mammoth Mountain are seeing record levels of interference from the ionized gases emerging from the fumaroles. This is the human dimension of the 2026 crisis, a high-tech, 21st century society pinned against the raw, escalating power of a fracturing tectonic system. As we peer into the remaining months of 2026 and the inevitable arrival of 2027, the scientific models no longer suggest a return to dormancy. The trend line for the Long Valley Caldera is not a curve. It is a steep, jagged ascent into a state of critical instability. The sheer volume of seismic data, now exceeding 54,000 events, indicates that the brittle ductile transition zone beneath the resurgent dome is migrating upward, meaning the crustal ceiling is thinning and weakening by the day. The risk is no longer contained within the Sierra Nevada. It is a spreading threat, and the consequences of a systemic failure here would ripple across the entire western United States, from the logistics hubs of the high desert to the global ports of San Pedro. One of the most critical yet overlooked vulnerabilities is the Western interconnection, the massive power grid that links the Pacific Northwest to the Southwest. High-voltage transmission lines, including the Pacific DC intertie, run through seismic corridors immediately adjacent to the caldera. In a hypothetical 2027 scenario, where ground deformation accelerates to 5 cm per month, the physical strain on these towers could trigger a cascading grid failure. We are talking about potential blackouts affecting 25 million residents across California, Nevada, and Arizona, with economic losses estimated at $500 million per day. The electrical heartbeat of the West is physically tethered to a landscape that is warping in real time. The vulnerability of the regional logistics corridor is equally alarming. Highway 395 isn't just a scenic route for tourists. It is a strategic supply artery for military installations like the Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake and the Army's National Training Center at Fort Irwin. A localized phreatic eruption, a violent steam-driven explosion, triggered when rising magma heat flash boils groundwater, could bury sections of this highway under several feet of debris and caustic ash within minutes. According to Caltrans and USACE contingency plans, the closure of this artery for more than 72 hours would create a logistics bottleneck felt in the warehouses of the Inland Empire and the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. The American supply chain is built on the assumption of geological stability, an assumption that the 54,000 recorded earthquakes have fundamentally shattered. Furthermore, we must address the multi-billion-dollar agricultural risk. A moderate eruptive event that sends a sustained ash plume westward over the Sierra Crest would settle directly into California's Central Valley. This is the breadbasket of the world, responsible for a massive portion of the nation's almond, citrus, and dairy production. Volcanic ash is not like wood ash. It is pulverized volcanic glass, chemically aggressive and physically abrasive. It destroys irrigation pumps, clogs the intake valves of tractors, and renders crops unsaleable. A single week of significant ashfall could result in agricultural losses exceeding $10 billion, causing global food prices to spike and hitting the US economy where it is most vulnerable. The scientists at the USGS and NOAA are now monitoring the atmospheric coupling of this system with unprecedented intensity. They are looking for thermal anomalies captured by satellite imagery that suggest heat is transferring from the magma reservoir to the surface, faster than the hydrothermal system can dissipate it. The physics of the situation is inescapable. The system is being driven by episodic magma injections that began in 2019, and the ground uplift of 1.4 meters is the Earth's way of declaring it can no longer contain the internal pressure. The rock is fracturing because it must. The Earth is rising because it has no other choice under the loss of lithostatic pressure. What separates the current analysis from mere speculation is the total shift in language from the experts. When the director of the USGS stands before a congressional subcommittee and calls this a national emergency, the era of academic debate has ended. We are now in an era of observation, preparation, and survival. The 40 to 50% probability of a new eruptive vent near Crowley Lake is not a newspaper headline. It is a statistical reality that urban planners and federal emergency responders are now using to draft evacuation protocols. It is no longer a question of if the system will change, but when the fracturing process reaches its terminal phase. As we move into the final quarter of 2026, the monitoring will only intensify. Every week, the USGS releases its bulletins, and every week the numbers confirm the same relentless trend. 10 millimeters of uplift per month, high-frequency swarms at shallow depths, and record-breaking gas concentrations. There is no political solution to the movement of magma. There is no legislative fix for the structural failure of the Sierra crust. There is only the data, the instruments, and the cold, hard reality of living on a planet that is geologically alive and currently in the midst of a violent transition. The 54,000 earthquakes we have documented are the signature of a giant waking up. They are the sound of the North American plate adjusting to a new, more dangerous equilibrium. Follow the data, watch the charts. The clock is ticking, and the Earth does not wait for us to be ready. Drop in the comments which fault line, volcano or geological event you want us to cover next, whether it is the Cascades, the San Andreas, or the new Madrid seismic zone. If you live near a volcanic or seismic zone, tell us where you are watching from and how you are preparing. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and remember, the most dangerous disaster is the one you believe can't happen in your own backyard.